Here we go, everybody. If we can get ourselves back in order here. We've got some material to cover in the next hour and 20 minutes or so that we may go straight through just because I don't want to miss anything here. Before we do that, I was just asked a question that I just want to spend a minute on because I think you'll like it. I don't want to, because we're going around the world here, I don't want to name a specific location, but this is the scenario that's presented to me, is that in a certain place, there's a pastor who, this is what I was told, doesn't have any sort of structure in terms of what we've talked about financially, keeps the money in his house. When asked about it, the answer is, I'm doing what God has told me to do. And those around him are, apparently there's a hesitancy because churches are self-governing, self-supporting, self-propagating to step in and have a hand in that church. I would say this, that there's a number of factors I don't know. I don't know who ordained the man. I don't know who he looks to. But I would say that somebody ordained him. Would I, if I were an ordination board somewhere who held this man's ordination, would I be inclined to take away his ordination? I would be, if I were on that board, I would go to him to restore, to help him. And if it's just me alone, not having any of the facts, I would think eventually some point would come where I would certainly not be willing to renew that person's ordination because of the way he's handling it. It just would be totally unacceptable to me. My guess, and then the other thing, affiliation is a handshake, but still, again, I don't know the exact situation, but he, I believe, is presenting himself as a Greater Grace church, right? The people in his church believe that they're in a Greater Grace church. So they're seeing something that is not representative or even close to being representative of Greater, like no one does. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's, I've never, we don't do it that way. So that in this sense, you could put it this way, I know it sounds a little bit conspiratorial, but sometimes it is. He's like using our name, holding people in his church, allowing him to do it his way. It's like that cannot continue. So either we're going to step in and prevail upon him to change what he's doing, possibly under the threat eventually of, like, we're not going to call you a Greater Grace ordained pastor anymore if you do it that way. Or he will have trouble in his church, and he is en route to losing that congregation, in my opinion. Maybe it's not obvious right now why that is, but people will become troubled, and it will bother them, and people will end up breaking off, leaving Greater Grace. This is just the process. We've just watched it. There's no mystery where this thing ends up, And then you have people who have left his church, and we're supposed to be mad at them for leaving his church because they left the Greater Grace church. Then we find out why they left, and we said, oh, geez. Well, you didn't leave Greater Grace, you left that specific situation. We send someone to minister to those people because they got nobody, and then this guy's mad at us for not, so it's just how it goes. Yes, sir?
I'm not, in any way condoning, the fact that maybe there's I'm not saying that it's, okay that a pastor would be doing that, but to say, wait a minute, you're Greater Grace, that's not how we do it. But didn't you state, in the beginning of classes previous, was that you encourage international churches to do things the way that they do them?
Sure.
So maybe in that instance, they do it that way.
You are correct.
So, to say, wait a minute, hold on, that's not how we do it, we're Greater Grace.
Right.
You need to stop doing that and do it this way, would be imposing the way that we do things in Baltimore, which is differently done in...
No, you're absolutely right about that. But just the way the question came to me, it came to me from an individual I believe to be close to that situation from another country, which makes me think that it's not done that way there either. And that, so I just, again, my part of it is that I would say that there, the handle I would have in that situation is an ordination, is here, just I would not want to reproduce that situation, let it go on. But no, you're right. You're right. There may be certain, you go to churches in Africa, they're dancing down the aisles, taking the offering. That doesn't go here. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm not against it, but it's just, I wouldn't try and do that here, you know. It would trouble people, you know. We go there and do it, and it's fun, and for us to do it, it's sin. So that's just how it goes, you know. So, okay. So that's that. Is that good in terms of how, that's as far as I can go with that right now. Yes, sir.
I was just thinking, just to add to that, perhaps whoever the pastor is, he would be denying people in the church, not necessarily as far as the money is concerned, but maybe there are some people who have administrative gifts in the area,
yes,
and now they cannot function in those
yes,
gifts. So there's a breakdown,
absolutely,
in a part of the church.
And he is missing out on help that is at hand for him. You know, bearing a burden, he shouldn't be, it just goes on and on. But then also, that's the reason why we have this course also, because there are things that we felt was, practical things that were missing in the curriculum. That's why this course exists, and we started it up, 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, we're over here.
So true. This question is coming from a country that have laws and rules, even in the secular world, that are almost similar to what happens in America.
Right.
It's a country also where, like you said, people have separated themselves, or there have been church splits because of the way some pastors handle this money the same way.
Right.
And so there are lessons for people to learn in that country, but they just don't learn. They do it their own way in the name of, this is what God told me to do.
Right. Yep. So that's what happens. Okay. Now we're going to get into the last part here for the rest of the evening and close out the course. We're going to talk about the subject, what we call liability. Okay? And I know this is probably not, I told you this last night, would be technical, not the most spiritually exciting subject. But here's the basic idea of it, is that anytime that you lead or influence people, anytime you gather people together and present a program for them, something for them to participate in, there is sort of a common sense idea that the person who's presenting this opportunity to me, that he is not bringing me into a place of danger, but there's been some thought put into this, that I'm going into a place where that is there is a reasonable level of safety. Okay? And that would, I'm just like any situation, you assume a guy with a hot dog stand, you assume he's taken some common sense precautions that he's not going to kill you with these hot dogs, and on it goes. And it's the same thing with a church, with a ministry, is that when we start doing things, we start organizing people, there is just some assumptions that we make. It has just to do with trust. It has to do with, I'm dealing with a sane, reasonable person, and there's just a measure here. That when he invites me over to his house for a Bible study, he's not there to steal from me. And I'll give you a little. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. I want to say this the right way. But I've been in situations where people that I've had a spiritual fellowship with have invited me over to their home, and it was a very reasonable assumption to me that my interaction with this person for the past 5 years has been around Christ. He's inviting me over to his home to fellowship around Christ. And then I get over to the house, the DVD goes into the TV, and he's trying to sell me insurance or some product. It's like, oh my God, I do not want this. How do I get out of here? You know what I'm saying? In those situations, it bothers me that this would happen. This person has used the trust, and this is an extreme example. He's used the trust that I've placed in him in a way that I had no idea that would be happening. So this is the basic idea. And as you go out and minister around the world, people will make these common sense assumptions that you are exercising some wisdom on how you're operating so that you're not drawing them into a place of undue danger. Okay? So that's the basic thought behind liability. And there's 5 concepts related to this that I want you to understand. And then there's 5 areas of specific concern, okay? And then there's 4 ways, generally speaking, to cover liability or areas of exposure, okay? So there's going to be 3 different lists you're going to get in the next hour or so. And so I will ask you, tell me about the 5 principles or concepts of liability, and I want you to give me these following 5 concepts. I don't want you to give me 5 areas of specific concern, and I don't want you to give me 4 ways to cover exposure until I ask you for that, okay? So I just sort of telegraphed what the questions are going to be. So you can wait for me to put this up on the website, or you can write the test yourself because you know what it's going to be, So here we go. Here's 5 things I want you to understand, okay? And when I ask the question on the final, I want you to give a long enough answer so I know that you understand it, not that you've just memorized some buzzwords, okay? And the first thing is really the one that I just said, is that we have certainly accountability as people and accountability before God, excuse me, and an accountability for the people that we're gathering, that I am going to take common sense steps in how I conduct myself, in how I organize things and care for the people that are with me to ensure, like I say, a relative measure of safety. Okay, I could give a million examples, but that is the principle, and I want you to understand that. You could probably think of some examples yourself, okay? Yes, sir. Sure. When I start organizing people in a ministry, something as simple as, meet me at the plaza, some public, I don't even own a building yet, so I have people meet I can picture the place in Dakar, Senegal, Independence Square. Meet me at Independence Square on Monday night at 7 p.m. for a Bible study, okay? If I knew in the square that night there was a communist demonstration that had been organized, if I had that knowledge, okay, it would be reasonable to think that I would not schedule the Bible study at that place and time because of the danger that I'd be putting people into, the possible conflict or danger. And this is an extreme example, and it can take more common sense forms, okay? And we'll get into some of these things. Once I start giving specific examples, we start to morph into other things. But, do you do sports club? Yeah. Anybody here do sports club? Andy, okay, we got a bunch of sports club people there. You take people to the field. I'm a parent and trusting my children to, Andy Castro or Jamie Munson or Amanda Haas. What's that? And it's reasonable to think that if they got to the field and the field was in a hazardous condition, like there'd been some party there the night before and there's needles and stuff like that scattered around the field, that if you saw something, you would do something about it, that you wouldn't expose your child to that. And I don't know how else to teach it except by example, but because this is so ingrained in us, you know what I mean? That it's almost like a part of how we think, but in some ways it isn't. So that anytime I organize something, I'm exercising leadership, the people are following me should reasonably assume that I am looking out for their interest in how I handle the organization, okay? That's concept number 1. There's some assumed responsibility there, okay? Principle number 2, not really so much related to principle number 1, separate principle, is that there are risks that I would take with myself that are not risks that I would take with other people. Okay? My parents live by the ocean. I have it in me on a warm day in November to go jump in the ocean with no lifeguard. Okay? Haven't done it recently, but I could do that on a given day if I were feeling that way. Okay? That's one situation. The water's probably 45, 48 degrees. I'm not going to last too long in it. But am I going to take my youth group down to the beach with no lifeguard and put them in the water and surf that they're not used to handling and currents that they don't know about? Am I going to do that? Okay? Am I going to take my senior group, the golden agers, down to the beach? Hey, let's all take our shoes off and run around in the water, See what I'm saying? There's risks I would take with myself that I'm not going to take with other people. And when I've got people that I've organized and I am leading into situations, the formula is not, I do this myself all the time. What's the big deal? That is not the question I'm asking myself. The question is, before God, before people, before those I'm responsible, am I taking a reasonable risk with these people's lives? Am I doing that? Okay? That's number 2. All right? Number 3, the United States and possibly other countries, I don't know so much how the world goes, but the United States is lawsuit crazy. Okay? In this country, the basic of the law is that you can sue anybody for anything. Okay? Everybody is entitled to his case in court. Okay? It's possible a judge could get mad if a lawsuit's ridiculous and penalize the person who brought the lawsuit for being all sorts of things, but you can basically sue anybody for anything. Okay? As we run our churches and as we run our ministries, the formula and the question is not, oh my gosh, we could be sued if we did it that way. That is not the standard. Okay? And it's not the standard from two sides. On one extreme, the fact that we could get sued doesn't mean we wouldn't do it, because anybody can sue anybody for anything. Okay? I could be sued for what I'm doing, Pastor Taggart, you teach in church administration and your college degree is in mathematics. Someone could make that case. You know what I'm saying? Someone could leave here. You implement one of my principles and it blows up in your face, and you damage somebody or someone gets sued and you come back and sue us for malpractice, for something like that. That could happen. That doesn't mean we don't teach. So that's not, the fact that someone could sue me doesn't mean that I'm not going to do something. Okay? Now, on the other side, the fact that I might not get sued, or probably won't be sued, or probably could get away with it without being sued, doesn't mean it's something that's wise and reasonable and prudent to do. So what we have to do is we have to look at the situation as a reasonable man. We think about the people we're dealing with, what their expectations might be, and we have to make decisions about providing a reasonable measure of safety and security. And if we've done that, we've done what we're supposed to do. Then if we, God forbid, get sued, we make our defense. Yes, this outcome occurred, but and we'll get into some more of that. We make our defense. Sometimes we'll win, sometimes we lose, but we are loving and caring for and pastoring the people who are with us. We are not looking at them as potential suitors, and we're trying to defend ourselves from a lawsuit. Okay? That's just not how we want to be thinking about people. That's not how God has called us to live. Okay, so that's number 3. Now, number 4, concept number 4, and this is a very important one, is this idea of a reasonably foreseen likelihood of an outcome where someone could be injured. Would a reasonable person looking at this situation conclude that, yes, you should have known that someone could have likely to be injured in this situation. You should have known that. You didn't know that, either willingly or ignorantly or willing ignorance, doesn't matter what it was. You, as organizing whatever you were organizing, should have seen this, because if you were reasonable, you would have seen it, and if you're not reasonable, you shouldn't be in charge. And so-and-so came into that situation, you failed to act to protect them from this hazard that you should have known about, and therefore you are at fault. Okay, that's how the argument, generally speaking, goes. Okay, so if you can reasonably foresee the chance that something would happen, you take on a responsibility to do something about it. Okay? That's why we don't have a plan to protect people from lightning in the church parking lot. Okay? We don't have that plan. Could it happen? Yes, it could. The odds are so small, and doing something about it is so difficult. Also, that's the other side of it. We just don't have a plan, anything in place to protect you from a lightning strike in the parking lot. Okay? You could experience a catastrophic injury out there due to being hit by lightning, and we would say, "Oh my gosh, sorry about that." Now, if there were a lightning storm, a violent lightning storm, okay, happening as we speak, we're looking out the window and seeing the crashes coming down, okay? Under those circumstances, are we going to conduct what's that?
5K marathon.
A 5K marathon? Are we going to take our Greater Grace Christian Academy children out into the parking lot for physical education? No, we're not. That's why at golf courses in lightning storms, people are ordered off the golf course, because something could and will happen. You're holding a metal object and lightning's coming down. It's dangerous. Get out. They will not allow it to go on. So the golf course takes on the responsibility to order people off at the golf course. Okay? So I don't know what they do. They send out the loud. I don't know how they do it. I'm not a golfer, but the loudspeaker goes out, whatever it is. And so they do it in that case. But you got to understand that, can you reasonably foresee it? Oh my God, this could happen. Well, is that reasonable? Is there anything we can do about it? Okay? Now, here's the last thing that I want you to understand. Okay? When it comes to liability, this is especially true in America. I get the question all the time. This happens, left and right. Geez, if someone hurts themselves doing that, are we liable? Okay? Now, liability is an assignment of blame. Okay? Liability is an assignment of blame. Who ultimately is going to make the decision about an assignment of blame? That's worked out in a court of law, right? A judge or a jury does that. I don't know if I'm liable. I mean, if something happened and I felt we were liable and the person had suffered some injury that I felt we were responsible for, then I probably proactively would do something about it. I probably would. Certainly with those of you familiar with the workers' comp laws, if someone's on the job here working for us, anything that happens to them in the course of their employment, we're accountable for, But there's a whole, it protects the employee, it protects the employer, but that's not what we're talking about. But I cannot answer the question, are we liable for it? I can tell you the likelihood of it, but the more of a question is, is this individual interested in holding us, what's the word, financially responsible in some measure for the injuries that they've suffered? That's really the question. And, if you look at the situation and the likelihood is such, a reasonable person would say, yeah, we probably should have foreseen that, should have done something about it, didn't. This person just got hurt. Well, the insurance company is going to step in and write a check in that situation long before that ever goes to a court of law, because nobody wants to go in front of a jury because anything can happen, But that question is impossible to answer, and it's not a question to be asking. If this happens, could we get sued? Okay, I understand what you're saying, but the real question is there something that we should do about it before that ever happens? Is there reasonable precautions we can take? So let's ask the right questions. You know, are we doing what we need to do as people who have an assumed responsibility because we're organizing people in this situation? That's the question. Okay? Those are the 5 concepts or principles related to liability that I want you to understand. If you don't understand those things, then you can't talk about the subject intelligently. Microphone is right in front of you.
I don't know if I make sense. But
Okay. I would say that the question, are we liable, is an abstract question that can only definitively be answered in a court of law. It is foolish to spend time on that question. Rather, we should spend our time, are we taking reasonable precautions to handle situations that we should be aware of where we can reasonably foresee a likelihood of injury, you know, sort of referring back to point number 4. Okay? All of these things, again, I'm not looking for lots of words, but I am looking for you to explain it in such a way that I know you understand it, not that you memorized a sentence that I said in class. Yes?
I remember the question that I wanted to ask.
Oh, I'm sorry. Microphone, send that right over to Ellen there.
Is it okay if we, for the questions, like, you know how your answers on the midterm was not complete sentences? Can we just write, like, phrases, like key point phrases?
Yes, you absolutely can. But again, for number 1, you know, if you just write like, you know, reasonable action / assume responsibility, I'm not going to believe that you know what you're talking about. You know, so you got to write it long enough so I know you really get it. Okay? But this is not an English test. Okay? It's a test on whatever the title of this course is. Okay. Now, next we're going to go to 4. I'm sorry, any more questions on those first 5 before we move on? Yes, sir.
You can say that you're going to answer this later, but what about what about mistakes? Like, because that could happen in the course of a day, where the boss just feels so desired to make you liable. And you say, well, I'm not exactly going to take this to court, but fine, I'll pay for that mistake that I made. You might be answering this.
Okay, let me, I think I'm going to get to that. I wrote it down, but I think I'm going to get to that sort of, but it's a good question. And the way it's going right now, I think we're going to get through this material and have some time at the end. Okay. Now, here's 4 specific ways to cover our areas. I'm sorry, this is 4 general ways to cover liabilities or area of exposure. Okay, these are things that can help you in probably every situation. Okay, first thing is not doing that which I am incompetent to do. Okay? So I have a very realistic assessment of what my abilities are, what my abilities are not. And I don't set myself up in a situation where a reasonable person would assume I know what I'm talking about when I really don't. Okay? I could give, you could give examples, I could give examples, I would say that's one reason why we, just to be very real with everybody here, why we have really streamlined the Bible College curriculum. We want to really have it focus on things that the Bible College was very good at. We weren't so happy with the Christian education major because people came out of here, but you couldn't really use it, at least in this country, to go and teach. It didn't work that way. So we felt that that wasn't the best thing for us to be doing. That's one example of that, And there was just some concern that people might come in take that major with a reasonable assumption that it would go a certain way, and we couldn't really back that up. So I'm just being very honest and open on that point. But we'll talk about some specific things elsewhere. But, here we go. We set up a Christian sports club. I go out and do a Christian sports club, and maybe I'm, hey, let's do football or, or swimming or something as a sports club. And swimming is a good example. I take the kids out, and one of the kids goes down and doesn't come back up. Okay, so you took these kids swimming. What did you have any training? I mean, were you aware of the dangers of water safety? No, I wasn't aware. Would a common sense person have assumed you had some knowledge of water safety before you took children to a swimming program? Yeah, I think a reasonable person would have assumed that. Do you have any training in water safety? No. Did you train the children before they went in the water? Any basics of water safety? No, I didn't do any of those things. So at that point, I'm doing something which I am incompetent to do. Okay? And that is, it's very important for us to judge our, I don't know if the word is judge, but evaluate soberly what we're good at, what we shouldn't be doing, get help, that type of thing. So don't do that which I'm incompetent to do. That will come up again this evening. The second thing I can do is I can gain professional advice. Okay? You saw it in action tonight, and in fact, God, I was speaking to myself, God was speaking to me. I know that there's some things I think I've done very well in this course, but also, like I said, there's some back office stuff. That's been exposed, that's missing there. I'm going to go to some professionals and ask for help. What do you recommend? What's going to help my students? What should I be doing? That might be one example. We could go on and on with that, but that will come up again also. But if there's an area that you're delving into where there's professional knowledge that would come to bear and be of benefit to you, get it. It's not unspiritual, right? It's not against God. I had ages ago, before most of you were born, I had a car accident. I was not going to tell that story tonight, but let me just put it this way. When the paramedic came, I really didn't care if he was a believer or not, okay? I didn't care if he was born again so much. I cared if he knew what he was doing, if he was going to get me in that ambulance. I was like hyperventilating. I thought I was going to die right there. And I wanted a guy who was going to save my life, get me in that ambulance safely, and get me to the hospital so I could walk again. That was like what was in my mind, okay? And there's people that can help us as believers, and we'll be glad to, and we should be available to their advice if they know what they're talking about. And I understand the balance of that, not to yoke up with unbelievers, but you know what I'm saying, okay? Are there professionals out there that can help me? Number 3, a general way to cover an area of exposure is with a policy, okay? We write a policy that deals with that area. That policy is reasonable. It makes sense. We talked about how to write a policy. You have that in your notes. That won't come up again, but that we should have policies in place. And that policy defines what we do and what we don't do, okay? This is how we train our Christian sports club leaders, okay? No, we do not train them to recognize signs of yellow fever, okay? It's an uncommon disease. We didn't train them to do that. We do give them some measure of training in first aid or whatever that is, but no, we don't do that, okay? But what that shows is that, number one, we had thought about that subject, that we took reasonable steps to cover that specific area, that subject. The policy was in place. Our people were trained. We were not reckless, okay? And you don't want to go into a court of law, and again, now I'm bringing up court. I said don't think about court, but you don't want to go in a court of law and be demonstrated to have been reckless in how you handle a certain situation, okay? I don't want to be, I don't want to, what's the word reckless mean? You go back and, reckon less. I did not think before I did this. I went into this without thinking and exposed people to a situation that caused a very bad outcome, Okay? So I have policies in place that cover these things, and provide a structure and an accountability. And no, our policy did not cover that. We did what we were trained to do. These are the reasonable steps we took. We did what we were trained to do. This was outside of that policy. Can we consider it for our policy? Of course we can. But we didn't fail here. Something bad happened. Okay? Bad things will happen. Okay? There will be car accidents. People will have heart attacks in our churches. Okay? People will get, take your counsel and misapply it. It goes on and on. Okay? And then the final way to cover areas of exposure is by buying insurance. Okay? There's churches all over America. I don't know, over 10,000, 50,000 churches. Bad things are happening every day in these churches. We just don't know which ones it's going to happen to. So we all get together, throw a little bit of money in the pile, and then money is there when we need it. Okay? That's what insurance is, but it saves the church from a catastrophic financial settlement that could, disrupt or close the church. And that's what insurance is for, okay, to protect us from those situations. Okay? So these are 4 general ways we cover exposure. Any questions about that? Insurance? Of the types of things that insurance pays? Yeah, I can tell you there's something called, it's property and liability coverage, okay, P&L. It's just what businesses buy. Property to cover your physical, and liability to cover liability. What is liability? Something bad happens to them and we end up bearing the blame. How do we know what we're liable for? I have no idea, Court of law decides that, but no, building burns down, we're covered for that. We're covered for anything bad happening. I don't know how else to say it. Well, you mean if somebody comes in the parking lot and loses his glasses, we're accountable for that? I don't know. The person sues us. If the person would come to us and say, how much to buy me some new glasses, we'd probably say, no, we ain't doing that. We don't have dumb insurance, okay? But if they can make their case, they can go into court and prove it and win, well, we got insurance to cover that. That's why we had that. We could be liable under some theory that we've never thought of. That's why it's so hard to talk about this. Or what kind of things did it cover? I don't know. Certain things are excluded. If there's a war, we get hit by a rocket from North Korea. We're not covered by war, acts of war. There's things like that we're not covered for, that are excluded. Okay? Okay, now here we go. 5 areas of specific concern. So you're going to know these 5 areas. And then with each of these areas of specific concern, I'm going to talk about what you can do about it. Okay? And I want you to know what can be done about it. Okay? Area number 1 is the physical plant. What I mean by that term is, civilians don't use it very often, but people in business, the physical plant, we're talking about the property, the real estate, the ground, and the buildings of Greater Grace World Outreach. That's the physical plant, okay? Sorry to use that term, but it is what it is, okay? And the risk that we bear is that people will come here and be injured, okay? That's the risk we bear, okay? The roof could fall down right now. Someone could be injured, all right? Physical plant. So that's the risk that someone will be physically injured here. What can we do about that risk? We know it exists. We bought the building. We know, oh my gosh, don't buy a building, you could get sued. Well, we're going to buy a building, and we have been sued, and we'll be sued again. It's just what are we doing about it that's reasonable and prudent to do the best we can so that when people come here, it's safe. Well, here we go. Number 1, we use common sense. All right? I hope you're all using common sense. And I hope you exercise it. I use common sense all the time. I know, anybody here at the marriage getaway in February? Anybody here go? Were you there? Are you teasing me? You were there, Angina. Yeah, you were there. I got there on Saturday. I walked into that big room with all the windows around it, and as I'm walking into that room, Paul Nye's set up there with all his gear, and there's an extension cord that goes back that's in a traffic lane. And I said, Paul, either Greater Grace is responsible for this or Heritage Hills is, but this is impossible that we would do that it would be this way. We got to do something about this. If someone's, either they or we have got to get a rug and put it over with it because someone could trip over it. What are the odds of that happening? I don't know, 1 in 10, 1 in 100, but there's enough of a chance there that someone could trip and fall that we're not going to leave that exposed. Okay? You know how when we, going back some years, we redid the front entry and you go from the youth department and there's a step down, and then you go from the missions area, there's a step down, and then you go from the main reception, there's a step down to Pastor Schaller area. You know all those steps, you know what I'm talking about? We put those steps there, and there was a conversation. I'm not going to name the individuals involved in that conversation. It's like, guys, we got to do something about this. Week number 2, I'm not going to name his name publicly, poor pastor in the church, the guy's from another affiliate ministry. He's here visiting. Hey, great to be in Baltimore. The poor guy, he's in his 70s. He's an overweight guy. He falls like week 2 or 3, he trips over it. Oh my gosh, Pastor so-and-so fell. It's like, oh my God. I knew it. We didn't do anything about it. And this guy that we love, that we care about, it's not even that we could be sued. It's like, how do we put this guy in this situation where he's tripped? Okay, guys, here's what we're doing. Every one of these steps down, we're going to have a standard step format. From above the step to below the step, there's going to be a contrasting color, either different color floor surfaces or put a mat there. Number 2, coming up, there's going to be yellow tape. And number 3, there's going to be a railing there. Okay? So the person who can see is going to come up, and there's going to be clues before his eyes. Hey, it's step coming, there's a railing there, and there's contrasting colors, and coming the other way, there's yellow tape. Okay? So the best of my knowledge, well, yeah, so civilian, yeah, but here you go. Yeah, yeah. Oh, really? Is that a step on those steps? There's a step down there? See, now thank you. I didn't know about that one. But we took care of all the others with the, except, how many people, has anybody tripped here? Oh my God, I did not know that was there. But over in the library, the step down from the library in there, we took care of that recently. That was one that escaped my notice. Guys, we got to do something. That was done. This one was not done. I apologize to the world. What's that? Yeah, well, I know. But we will take care of that. But since we've done that up there, we have had no more falls up there. It stopped it. You're out, and everybody has been in the family center. Anybody, maybe some of you hadn't. There's metal, like these lolly columns, these metal concrete-filled columns here. We got regular reports of, my incident reports that come to me years ago, head bumps, kids running around in there, bang, That was just a regular occurrence. And we put those, we spent a lot of money on those things. Those things are not cheap. You had to get in the right kind, I don't know, $300 a pop or something. And we put up 4, and then we put up some more. Since those have gone up, those reports have stopped, okay? And that's why incident reports are so important. You don't need to put that in your notes, but that's why this reporting, with an organization of our size, you got to get the info to someone that can do something about it, and they can take action. And this stuff gets priority around here, so we are being as proactive as we can. So, common sense. Number 2, a professional evaluation. There are people out there who you can hire, or maybe you have people in your church who can do it for free. You can do it for free because you have common sense about what someone might trip over, but people will come and do assessments of your property for hazards. Your insurance company will do it, and in fact, they do it anyway because because they're bearing the exposure, but they can be a great friend in the midst of this thing because they develop material. They have there's a name for the risk professionals or something like that will come out and do it, so you can get a professional evaluation. Okay, so that's the way number 2. Ask a pro to help you. Number 3 is conforming to standards and statutes. So if there's a building code about how something should be done, you really want to be in conformity with that code. You really do that. Code is there for a reason. I'll say publicly, at my house, I don't conform to building codes. I don't, it's the great American sport is to sneak around the building inspector. But we don't do that at the church. If there's codes, we want to obey these things because there's usually a good reason behind these things, and we care about you. Okay? So, and then the last thing, and this is, I didn't allude to it, I gave specific examples, that you correct deficiencies that are brought to your attention. Reason number 2 million why it's so important to have an atmosphere where people can communicate. Okay? Very, very important. You want people coming to you and telling you that there is a danger that they foresee. What makes it difficult is it's usually one of the cranky people in the church. It's a person who's a pain in the neck, who comes to you, doesn't communicate in a gracious and loving manner, communicates like they know it all, and what's the matter with you? Why haven't you done something about it? And I'm just telling you, those people are gifts because they will bring information to you that 100 other people, oh, I don't want to complain, oh, I love the leadership, oh, Pastor Taggart's busy, oh, Pastor Lange is perfect, I don't want to say anything bad that would hurt his feelings because I love him and he's so awesome. All that stuff does not help us because we do not get information we need to provide safety to the body here. You know how in the last couple of years we put those dividers out there in the parking lot of the church? Okay? How many people remember pre-dividers? Okay, a small show of hands here. Okay, half of you remember pre-dividers. Now we got the dividers out there. Our parking lot has been a problem forever. And I'm telling you, it is by the grace of God that no one has ever been injured out there. I'm saying that publicly. But what spurred us on a few years ago is we had a specific mother, she sent us an email and she really gave it to us, like, what is the problem with that? And that gave us the kick in the rear end that we needed to put those dividers out there. So between those dividers and the cone and the traffic control, the real problem is when GGCA is getting, in the mornings and evenings with the children. I'm not so concerned about church services. I'm concerned about it, but I didn't feel that was as much of a danger. But it's more people flying in their parents 40 miles an hour. My kid's late for school, flying through there. And so those dividers have really changed it. But I'm saying that happened because a body member complained in such a way that I could not deny the truth of what this person was saying. We were just like, you are absolutely right. We got to do something about it. And that's why these people are so helpful. So way number 4 is you're going to correct deficiencies that are brought to attention if it's reasonable to do it. In this case, it was like imperative to do it. Someone may bring something to your attention that's not reasonable, Well, the chapel is too loud during services. Okay, some people believe that. It's just people have different sensitivities. I don't, but I know people that do. You could damage somebody's hearing. No, I don't think that's possible. I mean, we can get the sound meter out there, but those standards exist. What are generally accepted standards? I don't know if that's the word for it, for dangerous levels that are. If those levels are out there, we do something about it. We'll run the test, but they're not. I know that. So this goes on, but there's should have known. There's known. Then you're more accountable. And then not only did you know about it, it was brought to your attention on more than one occasion by somebody else. And that should be like a flashing, red light. We got to do something about this. This is because non-professionals are people in the church are telling you something that's going to help you. Okay? And so that's area number 1, physical plant. The risk is physical injury. And I gave you 4 things to exercise to try and do something about that risk. Okay? Next specific area of liability or exposure is children. Okay? And specifically, when we take children under our supervision in programs of the church. That's what I'm talking about. Okay? And the risk is that a child would have some sort of abusive discipline, or that the child would be victimized by a predator. And unfortunately, in this day and age, okay, this predatory situation, it's symptomatic of the degeneration of our society. People are mentally ill. Mental illness is on the rise in various forms. We are fed a constant barrage of imagery, suggestive imagery. It just goes on and on and on, and you combine that with lack of knowledge of God, lack of even morality, and then people with problems in their lives, bad self-image, men with bad relationships and no relationships with their father, and then it's just and then not just the suggestive images, but the image. I'm sorry, I don't need to go too far with this, but there is. I think it was. I'm sure it was James Dobson says that when you mix sex and violence, and you have that imagery going into a man's head, it's an explosive combination. That's how he describes it. And so we, unfortunately, that is just the reality that we live in, okay? If you go on the internet and find out what zip code you live in, okay, and look up the registered sex offender directory, which Maryland has, I think every state has it, and you will find people in your neighborhood who have been convicted of sexual offenses. That just is with children, okay? And, okay, so my gosh, this person's living in my neighborhood, and just newsflash, everybody, I'm not worried about the people who are registered. I'm worried about the ones who aren't registered that are living in my neighborhood. I mean, that's out there also, People get convicted somewhere, they leave that jurisdiction, move across the country, set up residence, don't register. This is just out there. And that is what that's what you are faced with. Now, other countries, maybe you do not have the problems that the US of A has. Maybe some places in the world it's worse. Maybe some places in the world it's far better. So I don't mean I'm not saying that everybody, I just know what it's like in this country. And that's why, unfortunately, we have to take this subject very, very, very seriously, because it is just a reality when we set up children's ministries. Now, we have some basic procedures. Okay? And here we go. A policy would be never alone with a child. Okay? Our basic operating procedure right now is the rule of 3, but that's under review right now. Number 2, physical contact would be limited. I'm not saying you can't touch a child. It would be impossible for me to teach, maybe not impossible, but I'm a huggy person. When I'm with kids, I hug them. That's what I do. So I taught Bible, and it wasn't over the top. But I'm just saying. But physical contact needs to be limited and defined. What do you do? I don't put kids in my lap. I don't want to tell you Pastor Taggart's policy. I'm just saying these types of policies you want to define for your workers. Okay? I'm not going to hand out our handbook right now, but one exists, but we're revising it. And number 3 is that you're going to define your disciplinary procedures. Okay? You're going to define what that is. Your workers are going to be trained, and there's going to be lines that they will not cross because they're not allowed to. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but this is just one aspect. But I would say you have procedures and policies in place. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to screen all your workers. Okay? And that includes a criminal background check. And really, unfortunately, it's a nationwide one. We actually do international ones. Any internationals here that work with children? Do you? Yeah, we ran an international background check on you. We spend the money and do it. It's not cheap, but we do it because we're just not going to. My thing is, once you start making exceptions, it's just how far do we go with that? We're just going to do this because that's how we're going to do it. And you have to screen all your workers, and there's certain element. There's the background check. There's references that you actually have to check. And there's a policy that you're not going to have someone new to your church under any circumstance, even if you've screened them, You're not going to let someone new to your church into children's ministry. There's going to be a waiting period. Why is that? Because that's going to make it harder it's going to make for a predator who is looking for a church where he can come in and have that contact with children. It's going to be a long haul for him. He's got to hang around here for 6 months before he's even, allowed to make the application. Maybe I'm going to go somewhere else and find a softer church where they're going to let me start getting chummy with people right away. Okay? I'll say, just in terms of full disclosure, there is a philosophical conversation going on right now where one side is saying, but there's great value in being able to minister to young people one-on-one. There's things that come out in those conversations that are very important that won't come out in conversations. What do we do about that? Okay, I got that. There's another side of it, is Mr. Worker, Mrs. Worker, do you really want, how far do you want that one-on-one relationship to go? Are you really, where do you want that to go? And do you want the exposure that goes along with it? Do you want to be everything, or are we discipling that person to the body? So we're talking about that, and how that's going to affect the policy we write. So I understand these things. There's valid ministry, I don't want to call imperatives, motivations that can bump up against these policies, and we just got to find something that is safe. But I also think that really guarantees as much. There's no guarantee, but we've done everything we reasonably can to keep our children out of predatory situations, which unfortunately are just all too likely in the society in which we live. But we've screened the person. There was no indication, no criminal record. We checked all 3 of the references. The references were not his mother and brother. They were people that dealt with this person or appeared. Those references all came up strong. We put him through our training program. We supervised him. He on his own called the home and arranged that contact with that child. We did not know about it. We did everything we could. We still might be liable. I don't know what a court would decide, but we're not God. But we do everything we can to keep people out of these situations, okay? We have sign-offs, parental permission forms, okay? Why do we have sign-offs? Because we want to have documented evidence that the parent knew about the activity that was going to happen. All right, documented sign-offs. Do you know the word, Pastor? You didn't want me to write it down for you? Yeah, sign, S-I-G-N, -off, where a parent signs off on a certain activity, okay? And why do we want sign-offs? Number one, we don't want a situation, we have the kids, the parent doesn't even know about it. We don't want that situation, not fair to the parent. Number two, certain activities or situations, a parent might know something about the child that we would never know, and they want to keep them out of that situation. But if we don't give them the opportunity to even know what's going on, well, we've been unwise, okay? And one could say reckless. I don't know about that, but at least unwise. And included in that is some sort of policy about food. I think we have sort of a blanket thing that yes, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, in the course of our events, it is quite possible that your child could be handed food. That could include candy, So, it's burden. We've disclosed to you how we run our programs. If you have a problem with that, the burden's on you. You got to let us know. You got to help us with this. But don't tell us you had no idea your child who is diabetic was going to be given candy. We told you we were going to do that, okay? And it's right here, and you knew about it because we disclosed it to you. So that's children. The risk, we talked about abuse and discipline or being victimized by predators, and we've given you the very short list of things that we would reasonably do to avoid problems there. Okay. Yes, sir. And microphone to Mr. Shepard.
Just to add to this, like even these principles, I work for a nonprofit, And it's the same across the board. Like there's no, because we're the church, we do this, but
Right.
they do this across the board when you're dealing with the young people.
Yep. Yeah. So what we're doing here is not unreasonable. It is just done in this society today because it's necessary, you know? Now, as I'm thinking about it, I mean, this could really be, you could spend it, I don't want to say you could spend a course on it, but we could spend a lot of time on these subjects. Just because I'm giving it a lecture, don't think it's not important. This is like everything in this class is important going forward. But I think some of these things, there are plenty of resources out there to help. It's not like this is the only place you can get it. I'm just making you aware of the subject so you walk out of here knowing about it, and when you're in that situation, oh, that's right, I should be thinking about this, and then you go out and access those resources, you know. Other things that I spend tons of time on is information that's not so easy to find. Okay, now, next area. Specific area of exposure or liability is counseling, okay? And the risk that you bear is that incompetent advice leads to a negative outcome, okay? Incompetent advice leads to a negative outcome. The famous case that's given, I'm not even saying this is incompetent advice, this is just more what can happen. I'm pretty sure it was John MacArthur in California. This is going back some years ago. It might have been Chuck Smith, Chuck Swindoll, one of those guys. I'm sorry, this is going over the internet if I'm misquoting. But a well-known national figure, I think it went something like this. There's a counseling session. Is it possible that a person could commit suicide and still go to heaven? Answer, yes. I believe once saved, always saved. It could, yes, I think it's possible that someone could commit suicide, but he's a believer, goes right into the presence of Jesus Christ, forgiven, forgotten, gone forever. Person goes out and kills himself. Okay, that this happened. Church gets sued by the family for improper counseling. Okay, this can happen. So, what do we do? I mean, what do we do about that? I mean, that puts a tremendous burden on us. Here we go. Number one, we want to limit our counseling to pastoral counseling. Okay? We want to be counseling people on spiritual matters. Okay? When they start asking questions about other matters that are outside our area of expertise, okay? That we do not counsel along those lines. You know, we give biblical, spiritual counseling to people. That's what we do. That's what we're there to do. When it comes into another area that's outside of that, we're very relaxed. We don't say, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm a bad counselor, or I want to be everything to this person, so I'm going to start answering these questions. Instead, we stop, and we're very, very free to refer people to professionals. Okay? Very, very free to refer people to professionals. Hey, you want help with finances? You know what? There's great material out there, Crown Financial, you can read their stuff. Go find an accountant, talk to somebody who knows about these matters. You know, I don't want to talk to you about your will and what should be in your will. Okay? I'm not going to get into that conversation with you. Okay? So we refer people to professionals, and especially, and this happens, it doesn't happen to me frequently, but it happens often enough, that there are people in the church that, and again, I got to be careful how I say this, because I'm not really qualified to even make this judgment. But there are people in this church who appear to be unable to respond to the type of spiritual advice that most people can respond to. And these people also, to me, exhibit behavior that is in the fringe, 1% of the population. That makes me wonder, not being a professional, not being really able to make this evaluation, if there might be issues of mental health that that person could have. Okay? So, in the course of my conversation or counseling, I could say to them, I suggest that you go have a professional evaluation done to rule certain things out, because I fear that I could be giving you certain types of advice that doesn't apply to your situation because your brain is functioning a certain way, and that's not what I'm talking about. You see what I'm saying? So we got to be very, very much aware of that. So refer people to financial professionals, to mental health professionals, that type of thing. Home improvement professionals. I mean, people will come to, Pastor, what do I do about this? Pastor, do I buy this car? All sorts of things, because they're looking to us for those things. We got to stay out of those things if we don't know what we're talking about. Okay? Now, if people were to come to me with certain types of advice, I would answer the question. Okay? I am a business, financial management professional. I've been doing this a long, long time, So you could look at my experience. I've been doing this, what year is this? 2012? Been doing this for 25 years, you know what I'm saying? So it's like there's certain things I do. I am competent to answer these questions, So I just, you don't have to not answer things just because you're a pastor, but you got to know what you're talking about. But included in this, now listen to this, and I've sort of hit it, but so we limit our counsel to pastoral counseling. We refer people to professionals. In the course, but a separate thought, we disclaim psychiatric, legal, or other types of expertise. Okay? I do not know about these subjects as a professional. I cannot give you professional advice. Someone comes to us for marriage counseling. Okay? I'm not going to give them legal advice. I'm going to talk to you about how to reconcile your marriage, because that's what the Bible is about. If you need information how to protect yourself from losing custody of your children, you're talking to the wrong guy. I hope you're not in that situation. It could happen to you. God forbid, if it does, I don't want you to get a raw deal from your, however it's going. But go talk to somebody else about that. The only thing I have to talk to you about is how to save your marriage before God. Okay? Now, included in disclaiming psychiatric, legal, or other types of expertise, especially in the psychiatric area, I'm going to avoid professional, the word is jargon, vocabulary that is specific to a certain type of academic discipline. Okay? I'm not going to throw around the word depression talking to somebody. I don't know if it's a depression or not. I'm not that is a medical diagnosis of depression. I'm not qualified to make that judgment. Discouraged, having a rough time, having thoughts that bother you, that type of stuff, we can talk along those lines. But everybody in this country, there's been, those of us who've been around, there's like a cycle of fashionable diagnoses. You know what I'm saying? When I was a kid in school, it was hyperactivity. That was the big thing. You know what I'm saying? And then that sort of vaporized for a while. Then it was something else that I forget. And then it's like, what is it? ADD, right? Attention deficit disorder. And that, everyone's getting diagnosed and medicated for that. Mr. Castro, take the microphone. Well, what I hear going to kids now is autism. No, I believe autism is real. I'm sorry, but I read something that said 10% of kids have autism. Like, where are they? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I don't know where they are. And so I'm just saying, when we start throwing these diagnoses around, you go ahead, send the microphone over. You can't just stand and deliver. There you go, sir.
They say the doctors like these diagnoses to be a part of their portfolio.
Right. Yeah.
To be able to say that I diagnosed this.
Yeah. And I don't want to go too far down this road, because you could get me on a different subject here. I have an opinion that these things are overdiagnosed and that medicine is oversubscribed. I'm also very aware. I used to work in an institution that housed men with psychiatric disorders, and these guys had real psychiatric disorders, and the medications they took helped them in their quality of life, and it was better than nothing. It didn't heal them, but it helped them, so I'm not against that stuff at all. And we're very, very sympathetic, and we never want to look at someone with a bona fide, mental disorder and tell them that they don't have faith. We go both sides of this thing, But we also know that, I'm going to keep out of that because it's not my area of expertise. I have some opinions about it. Okay? So we're going to avoid professional jargon in our conversation. Okay, gee, you're up and down. Yeah, it seems kind of like bipolar. I would never say that, We should never say that unless we know what we're talking about. And then finally, we practice this here, we have a limited, publicized, and trained counseling staff, okay? We don't have a large counseling staff, we have a small one, okay? We name who these people are. When someone calls the church and asks for counseling, there's a limited number of people that we refer people to for counseling. And our staff is limited, it's publicized, and it's trained. We train our counseling staff how to counsel, and with the training is the specific things we're talking about today. And then with our small professional counseling staff, perhaps we will want to give them a certain measure of training in symptoms of mental, some of these different things. Family therapy, how does that go? We're not against these disciplines. They can be helpful on the foundation of the Word of God and the filling of the Spirit. We don't want to be controlled by these disciplines and the way the world teaches them, but they can be helpful to us. There are some things in them that can be helpful, and we go that way, but we don't just throw this stuff out there. So that is all I have to say about counseling, okay? The risk incompetent advice causes a negative outcome. We gave you 4 points on that to avoid that. Number 4 is events. This is similar to just having a physical plant, but generally with events, it might be off-site in someone else's location. And number 2, they tend to involve larger groups of people that we normally don't handle. So you have a larger group of people that you're not used to dealing with, and you're taking people that don't deal with large groups of people and putting them in charge of large groups of people. You got to be careful, okay? Just because I can manage a class of 15 kids in Sunday school doesn't mean I can manage 100 kids in a soccer game or something. It's a different thing. Again, the risk is physical injury, and we are going to provide or mitigate that risk with implementation and supervision of activities in some planned and thought-out manner. Number 2, for providing transportation, we're going to be very careful. Only approved drivers. We screen all our drivers. Not anybody can jump in a vehicle and can drive it. Okay, we're really careful with that. Oh, geez, we got a few extra kids. Who can do it? Oh, so-and-so can do it. Yeah, he's got a car. Bring it. Yeah, thanks so much. We throw him in the car. We just have no idea if that guy has a license, if that car is inspected. We don't know any of those things. So just these are situations where bad things can happen, and we're very, very careful about it. We're not so careful that we don't do events. We do huge events, okay? Convention is huge. Thousands of people on the property at one time. It's like we're a small town. So point number 3 on how we cover events is by having a security, a medical, and a hospitality staff where appropriate. People whose job it is to watch out for the people who are attending events. They have no other job than to watch out for those people. Your whole staff is not tied up, supervising flag football. You have some extra bodies around to watch these things. Okay, so these things are very, very important, and it will help you. People come, they have a problem. Where do I turn to? Where do I go? I couldn't find anybody. I grab so-and-so. So-and-so jumps in. So-and-so thinks he's part of the staff but isn't, or is part of the staff but not part of the event staff. He starts thinking, doing things, what should be done. And very, very good people can make very, very bad decisions in areas in which they are not trained. Common sense, but bad decisions maybe, because they don't know about these things. Okay, final area of specific area of risk that we want to bring up is in employment, which was alluded to in a question. Here is the risk that we do damage to people that affects their livelihood and the testimony of the church. Okay? We do damage to people that affects their livelihood and the testimony of the church. So someone comes to work for us, and again, the overall assumption for this whole subject is that they're coming into a safe situation. And, of course, now we spent a good part of this course about managing and supervising people, so I don't need to recover all that ground, but there's a few considerations I want to talk about here. First isn't really how to cover your liability. It's just a fact in the United States that the general overriding principle of employment is something called at-will employment. You don't have to work for me, and I don't have to hire you. You don't have to keep working for me, and I don't have to keep you working for me. Okay, that's the general principle of it. There's exceptions to that. There's certain classes of people that are protected. Okay? If I decide I don't want to hire you or because of the color of your skin, I'm breaking the law. That principle overrides, the principle of at-will employment. There's certain protected classes of people, but at will is the general principle. Okay? Greater Grace World Outreach can walk into my office tomorrow and say, "Thank you very much, Pastor Taggart. Your services are no longer needed. Please take your personal belongings and leave the building and turn your keys." And they can do that, and I wouldn't like it, but I would walk out of the building, and the law would back up the church. Okay? Okay. The second thing, it's going to take me a moment to communicate this, and I want to make sure I get this the right way, is that I don't have a good catchphrase, but because of the principle of at-will employment, an employer is not only free, but bears a responsibility to communicate freely and honestly with the employment about his performance on the job. Okay? We communicate with our employees freely and honestly about the job they are doing. But the reason employers don't do it is because they have a false fear, a wrong concept or a false fear about employment law and liability and what could happen to me, and this employee could complain. So they don't communicate very simple things. In my opinion, or in my observation, you are failing in your job in this, and this area. But employers don't say it to people because they're afraid of getting sued, because of some other area of employment law. Okay? But in a sense, they have it backwards. But because they don't communicate what's really going on in their minds towards that employee, they wait until a situation occurs, and then they try and use that situation to get rid of the employee when that's not really the problem in the first place. You're fired. Why am I being fired? Well, you've been late 3 times in the last month, and I can't take it anymore. You know what I'm saying? So you've given that employee an excuse why he was fired, but it's not the real reason. The real reason you're unhappy with his performance, but you haven't told him. You don't know how to communicate him because I don't know what that is, but I sort of understand it because no one likes having unpleasant conversations. So you told this person you're losing your job because of latenesses. So that employee goes out. Okay, thank you very much. And then he starts thinking to himself, wait a minute now. I know that the guy working next to me was late 4 times that month. He didn't get fired. What's going on here? So then that employee goes out and he hires an attorney, which he probably should in that situation. I would never sue an employer, but I just understand it. Could. And the attorney starts looking through records, and he finds that this company has no policy about firing people. The policy that was told the fired employee is not being enforced uniformly and consistently. And the employer, in fact, lied to or what the employer said to this employee doesn't even make sense based on the employer's behavior in other situations. And a guy just lost his job and lost his livelihood, and he didn't even get a straight story from the guy who let him go. So the employer, because he feared having honest conversations, uncomfortable, possibly unpleasant conversations about job performance, uses some technicality to get rid of him and ends up creating the very situation that he feared. That's why I don't want you in that situation, but in America it can happen. That's why, I don't even know how to encapsulate that concept. But number 4, that's why we want to communicate clearly and often with our employees. And if their employment is at risk, communicate that to them. This is a serious enough issue that we need to solve it, or else otherwise it's possible that you might not be working here. And it's no fun to say that to people. But look, let's give it 6 months. Point A, B, and C is what we're looking for improvement in. And we're going to sit down again in 6 months. We're going to take a look at these things and have another conversation. Okay? So you tell them their employment is at risk. You tell them, opportunity for improvement, a timeline for evaluation. And you've been, number 1, forget about the law, you've been very, very fair to that individual as an employer. Just as a Christian employer, is it fair to get rid of someone I don't even know why? I mean, do you want to be that type of person? And possibly you've lost somebody who could have been a good employee. You just never told them what they had to do. And this happens. This is how we live. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I talk about the personal meetings, talking about important things. Employers do not have real conversations with their employees. They don't have the time. They don't make the investment. They're afraid to have these conversations, and they'd rather be vague and generally unkind to the person and hope they'll just leave and be glad when they do. Like, why would we treat people that way? Why would you, as a believer and running a church or as a pastor, ever want to treat people that way? We don't, okay? So we communicate early and often, and don't let employment law, like your fear of employment law, make you act in strange ways that put you into the exact situation you were trying to avoid. And you avoid it by being honest with people about where they stand. Then they know it was, and you document it, and then there's nothing to talk about. Gee, you fired me because color of my skin, or because some other reason that you shouldn't have done that for. That's not why I fired you. We had 3 meetings about it. I sent you an email afterwards telling you what we discussed. Here it is. Nothing changed. You're gone. I'm sorry. I wouldn't say it that way, but you know what I'm saying. It's like that's what happened. Now, the 4th thing is know your employment laws and comply with them. Okay? Andy Castro talked about the situation of making an employee pay for his mistake. I don't know, there may be a law on that, but there at least ought to be a policy. If your company has a policy on it, communicate to everybody and enforce it uniformly and fairly, and forget about getting sued. It's just, you just want to, as an employer, you're running an organ, you want to be fair. As a church, we want to treat people fairly, We want there to be some measure of justice, because if there's not justice and equity, it will trouble people, And I understand about justice is at the cross, but we're talking about a different realm here, okay? If I get these two gentlemen working for me, and I yell at one for doing something, I don't yell at him for doing it. Over time, that's going to bother a number of people and will harm your organization, and that's why we're giving you things that to help your organization, okay? So, it's 9:01. I'm going to attempt to put this stuff up on the website tomorrow. I can't promise it. I know I got an email requesting it. I'm just sorry about that. I haven't gotten to it yet. But you're very right to be asking for that. This is your last shot at me. Anything else about the final that you want to tell me? Ask. What I'm going to do is we're going to close out the class. I'm going to shut this off. Thank you, those of you watching this distance learning.